So here's some of the questions we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about aligning subwoofers. We're going to talk about flying subwoofers. And we're going to talk about this EQ averaging thing and why is this not working for Tyler. But before we do that, I want to talk to Chad. He's my special guest for today because Chad does a lot of great work in broadcast, in concert sound, in other types of events around the Bahamas and the US. But he's also taken one of my courses, which is Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound. Or maybe more. Have you taken more than Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound?
Yeah, I took Stefan's course too.
Oh, cool. The RF troubleshooting.
Yeah, the RF troubleshooting.
Cool. Great. Well, I wanted to ask you a few questions about that. So let me grab my questions here. And how do I move this out of the way? Here we are, struggling with Zoom. Okay. So first of all, how did you first hear about Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound? What were you doing before that? What sort of training had you been doing before that? Did you go to school for sound? Were a musician? How did you kind of get here?
Well, I started out with my dad's studio, long story short. And I went off to Full Sail College in Orlando. So I studied recording arts. And from there, I went on, I got, the ship came and did some kind of event at the school and a job fair, I should say. They picked me up from there. They called me in December. That's when I graduated. And then on January 2007, I was on ships.
Oh, wow. So you started out doing cruise ships.
Yeah, on cruise ships on Royal Caribbean. So, yeah, I started as a stage staff. I wasn't a sound tech as yet. And a year in, I became a sound tech from there. Now, fast forward 7 years later, I came back home. I did some sound gigs here. And then probably a year ago, I went to do Bob McCarthy's course. And I went to Texas, Lubbock. And not his course, but he had a seminar there. And then after I came home, I was just searching online because I continually try to learn. So then I found some of your YouTube clips. That's how I got put on to you, and just took the course, paid monthly, and went from there. And here I am.
Cool. So I'm always sort of curious how people find the stuff that they do, right? There's no best university for doing live sound in the world. So everyone has sort of a slightly different path. But I've noticed a lot of similarities in people's paths are that they do usually some kind of formal education and then they get out into the field and then they sort of discover, I need a little bit more than this. And so it sounds like you discovered the work of Bob McCarthy, you went to one of his seminars and sort of kept moving forward from there. Is that right?
Yep, that's it.
Cool. So I'm also curious how people end up signing up for Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound, and I'm wondering if there was any hesitation. Well, I'm sure there was. It's sort of hard to buy things online, right? Especially education. So what was the hesitation or question in your mind before you signed up for Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound?
Well, for me, it was kind of easy because Dwayne was ahead of me. You know Dwayne Roberts. He's from the Bahamas too. So he did the course and I worked with him a couple of times at a hotel. So I got the kind of trust from him. And just looking at some of your videos, I mean, it's just trying to learn from somebody who seems like they know what they're doing.
Okay.
And going from there. And the monthly payment helped too, because you don't want to put everything in one time. So just to try it out, if anybody has questions, you could just try it out for a month. If you don't like it, obviously you don't have to pay anymore. So, that helps. It's not
Cool.
a lump sum you have to do.
So your first question was sort of, can I trust this person? Will it be good for me? And luckily you knew someone personally who had already taken it. And so.
Right. So I had a slight advantage.
And then your next question was, will I be able to afford it? And then you found out that you can actually
Do
pay
monthly payment. Yeah.
monthly instead of all at once. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. The last thing I wanted to ask you is if you could give us an example of maybe something you learned in the course from one of the lessons that then you were able to use out in the field on a show. Are you able to remember anything?
Yeah. I think for me, it's a bunch of small things that you learn in the course that I won't like go over now. But I think the major thing
Small things,
is,
that's fine.
I think the major thing would be the map XT exercises, whereas for me, everything is about pre-planning, and it makes my work a lot easier in the field. So the ability to do my events on MapXT as a plan, and then go out in the field and just execute is a huge thing. So that's probably the exercises from the course actually helps me be more fluent when it comes to those kind of things.
Sure. And if people don't know what MapXT is, that doesn't really matter. I mean, you could be doing those designs potentially just on pencil and paper.
Right.
Just any sort of preparation, thinking about how all these pieces of the puzzle are going to fit together. Sounds like it was helpful for you.
Yeah. And the calculations, because I kind of like math, so the calculations actually help. So even if I don't have the software to do it, like Smart or Sat Live, I could do the calculations myself and get going. Because as you know, in sound, everything is about speed and how much you could fit in a small amount of time. So that helps with speed, with setting up and getting things running when it comes to live sound.
Yeah. So just to say something quickly about that, I really appreciate what you said there, because it's the thing that makes the job constantly interesting and also constantly potentially stressful, right? There's a certain amount of variety every time where it's like in your mind, you could be thinking, oh no, what's going to go wrong this time? Or, oh no, or, hey, what sort of challenges am I going to run into today? So, I mean, you've been working on shows for many years now, and you were just telling me the other day about sort of some problems coming up for you mixing monitors on the stage. And we were talking about potential reasons for that. And I've been working on shows for a long time too, and I still have just as many problems as you guys do, just different ones. Maybe I get out into the field and there's something I don't know about that you don't know about. So I don't know. I just wanted to share that that's one of the reasons why I like working in audio.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Chad. If you can stick around for another couple of minutes, I'll say if anyone wants to ask Chad questions about Pro Audio Workshop Seeing Sound, they can, and I would be happy to answer any as well.
I got about 6 more minutes.
Cool. Yeah. Otherwise, let's get into some of the questions that people sent in ahead of time. And those of you who are here with me live on Zoom, please feel free to unmute yourself and talk at any time. I would love to get your input on some of these questions. And those of you who are joining us on Facebook, if you want to chat in, I'll try to see some of your chats. All right, let me just reposition some of these windows. All right, so Akil wrote in and said, if we have a line subwoofer array or a space subwoofer array, Chad, I'm going to mute you for now. Do we phase align the subs to top globally by turning all the subs online, or do we individually delay each sub? Would be great if you could clear my thought on this. Thank you. So here's what I think Akil is talking about. If we take a look at a design kind of like this, and we say that we've got some subs down here, and we've got some mains up here. And what Akil is thinking, he's thinking, hey, I know that low frequencies kind of go everywhere. So people up here are going to hear all of these speakers. This person's going to hear all these speakers, and so on and so forth. Everyone in this room is going to hear every one of these speakers in the low end, the very low end, right? So he's kind of wondering, should I be worried about this relationship if this person listening here is hearing this relationship and this relationship and this relationship, so there's all these things happening. So what he's asking is, should I phase align this entire group of subs to one of these mains, or should I take each sub individually and say, hey, what's the phase alignment between this guy, and then go down the line? What's the phase alignment between this guy and this guy? I'm just using this as an example. I'm actually using this back here as my alignment point. Let me turn on some dimensions just to remind myself of that. So this is kind of the question, and I think this is an interesting question that hasn't come up before, and I think you would only be asking this if you have enough processing channels to even think about this, right? So I would like to know from you guys here on Zoom, Chad, Donnie, those of you who are joining us on Facebook, have any of you ever tried this? Have you ever tried to break apart a subarray and align each sub individually to another main? Just curious about that.
For me, no. I just align all of them because all of them come out of one aux, right? Usually, unless you're doing a special like N-Fi or something, and then I just align all of them to the top speakers.
Yeah, me too.
So for me, no.
Let me see if anyone else. I'm gonna check the chat. Eric says sometimes outer and inner. That's interesting, Eric. So you're saying sometimes you'll kind of break it apart so that maybe these two subs will have a different alignment than, you know, two subs in the middle or something like that. So Eric, I'm curious, what kind of result does that give you? Because I've never tried that. If you could type in and say, like, what's your thinking behind that? So without getting too complicated here, what I'm going to say about this is just to respect your order of operations. And I wrote that down over here so we can look at that. You always want to start with your coupled symmetrical subsystems, right? So in this example we're looking at, we would want to do this subsystem by itself, get that all working together before we move on to combining it with this other subsystem. This is a subsystem of speakers. So we combine all of these together first before then we venture out into the world of uncoupled and asymmetry and try to get then this array to work with this array. Okay, and it's just kind of as simple as that. Just keep in mind your order of operations. I'm trying to remember if there was something else I was going to say. The main other thing I would say is that if you are adjusting these delay times individually, then you're effectively creating some kind of an arc outwards, right? Outwards or inwards. And that's going to adjust the coverage shape that you put into the room. So if you had initially designed this array so that it perfectly matches this audience plane, then if you start changing the delay times, then you're also going to change the coverage shape. So just watch out for that. And then lastly, I guess I'll just say that there's a balance of complexity, right? Even if you do have the processing power to break everything apart and treat it individually, then you've got to kind of balance all these things in your brain. So as you're doing the optimization, you've got to be thinking about all these different relationships. Let me see if anyone else had anything to say about this. So Eric says, sometimes I've tried to have the crossover lower on the inner pair. This was a couple of years ago and I don't do it anymore, so I guess it wasn't a success. Okay. I'm happy to hear people experimenting with stuff like this. It's and I would love to hear more about your results if you're listening to this and you've done something different.
Yeah, and sorry, and probably a measurement, if you do measurements on it too, it'll probably give you the answer that you want, right?
You're saying to compare these two different strategies, do a measurement, and then see which one's better?
Right, and see which one has the best coverage, or if it even works.
Sure, you could do that. You would need to measure in a lot of different places, right?
Yeah.
To really see across the entire audience plane here, which result has less errors, let's say.
Right.
Yeah,
Or you could try it in Map XT.
Right. You could do a prediction of this.
Yeah.
I didn't prepare anything like that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think we would actually be able to see much. But yeah, that would be an interesting experiment as well. Good idea, Chad.
Yeah. But I got a roll.
Okay,
so
cool.
Good luck, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
No problem, man.
So since we were talking about the last idea I brought to you about this was complexity and the balance of complexity and keeping things simple, I just wanted to talk about Ian's question. So I think this is the Ian that's here with us today. And Ian, I know you have two questions. I'm going to hit the first one today because it seemed to make more sense here. Ian says, what would be the situation where I would choose to fly the subs rather than ground stack them? And I think this is a good example of that. And the most important reason is that you get to simplify things a little bit. If you have the hardware, if your rigging can withstand the weight, then if you can put these subs up here, then all of a sudden you've eliminated one of the relationships you have to worry about. What I mean by that is that right now we've got several different relationships to worry about in the horizontal plane and the vertical plane. Okay, but if we put the subs on top of the mains, then they're effectively coupled. Then all we really have to worry about is their relationship in the horizontal plane. Because if the subs are on top of the mains, then the distance offset between them to each of the listeners in the audience plane is much smaller. So it's as simple as that for me. I would love to do it every time. I think the reason that people don't do it is either because they don't have the hardware, maybe the time, or the weight limitations to put it up there because of the rigging. Or if people are trying to make some kind of special subarray to match their audience plane. That's might be a little bit harder to do if then you are making several different uncoupled arrays when you put them up with your other arrays. Okay, so if you're doing some kind of maybe a delayed arc or in-fire and you want those on the ground so that you can have this really specific shape, then you might not put them up in the air. Then it's another question of resources, I guess, now that I mentioned that, because you could basically do almost any subarray that you do on the ground up in the air as long as you have the rigging. So you could rig these separately and you could just move this whole array up in the air and put it here right behind the subs, and then you have eliminated some of the distance offset that you've created here. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. I hope I didn't make it more complicated than necessary. Ian, let me know if that's kind of what you were thinking in terms of your question. Cool. Just checking the chat box here. All right, I think I'm going to close this. Give my computer some, free up some processing speed here. And we'll get to Tyler's question. What are the best measurement spots to get an average EQ for a single set of speakers? And he said he tried measuring vertical top, vertical bottom on axis, and then averaging that. He said that the results had lots of variance, so pretty much had to default to the on-ax position, EQ, and throw averaging out the window. I read somewhere that the very top and very bottom of the array had a different sound profile than being closer to on-ax. The same article brought up the star method for capturing EQ traces and averaging, but didn't elaborate. I'd like to try the star method next time, but I found little to no information on executing it. So before I see anything, anyone here with me on Zoom or on Facebook that would like to speak to Tyler's question here? There's actually several questions here, but you guys can unmute yourself or you can type into the comments box and I will read them. I'm sure there's different kinds of delay on each of these platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start saying a few things, but then I'll check on your comments as well. So Tyler, I don't know if you're here, but I would like to, I emailed you to try to get some more feedback on this. The reason is that I feel like there are several different ways we could go in talking about this topic. I'm not sure which one is exactly the right way to go. So I think what I'll do is I'm just going to mention several different ideas, see if any of them help you, and then also send me some more information and we can continue the conversation. So let's break your question apart a little bit. First, you mentioned best measurement spots. So the easy answer to best measurement spots are the spots that give you actionable data that give you the best result. Okay, I know that's not a real answer, but I just needed to say that ahead of time because in the SMART training class that I took with Jamie Anderson, he says that people who are really experienced, really good, sometimes can just take one measurement and then they know just from that measurement what all the other measurements are. So that would be sort of the ideal case and fastest scenario where you just put down one mic, take a single measurement, and you already know. I talked to someone who, I'm blanking on his name right now, sorry. I talked to someone who was trying to figure this out for themselves earlier this year, and what they were doing was measuring like every row from vertical bottom to vertical top in an audience plane, comparing those, making an average, and then trying to find the one position that was closest to the average so that in the future, they could just measure that one position if they didn't have enough time to take more measurements and know that that one position is closest to the average. So I'll have to check back in with that person and find out what their results were. I haven't tried that myself, but I thought it was kind of a cool idea. And then I also want to share with you guys about kind of this 3 mic position that he mentions, vertical top, vertical bottom on axis. I published a video about this if you want to see what he's talking about. So I'm going to grab this link. I'll put it into all of the chat boxes. Here's that video. So here's what he's talking about. You've got an array up here somewhere, and then you've got this audience plane. And this is how I do it most often in the field, and I think this is probably what he's talking about. So you've got a microphone here at the start of coverage and a microphone at the end of coverage, and then as well one here in the center. And with those 3 positions plus an average, you should pretty well be able to efficiently characterize the way your array is showing up, its frequency response there in the field. And let me skip to a point here where I show the variation. So the reason I wanted to see your measurements, Tyler, is because I don't know what you mean by a lot of variation. So that's the next thing I was going to talk about here. You say the results had a lot of variance and I had to throw it out. Well, I want to know how much variance. Maybe it wasn't as much as you think it was. This looks like a lot of variance. If I take a look at SMART, I brought in some measurements here. Let me hide these. So here are 3 measurements that I took of a T8 array, something similar to this, but not exactly the same thing. If you were to zoom in here and be really critical, you might say, wow, there's a lot of variation here. Maybe I should throw this out. But if you zoom out and, sorry, let me hide everything again. And then you look at an average on top of that, which is this pink trace, then this really works. And I can sort of just connect the dots here. And if I just run across the tops here, I can see what the kind of tonal balance is of this array in this room. Okay, so I would say general guideline within 6 dB is not too much variance. So I'd be curious of what your results actually were. So this is the reason why my target traces here, why I use 2 of them now, is because, let me make sure there's no offsets. Now, instead of just being so rigid and just looking at a single measurement, a single line, I can kind of look at a corridor, if you will, of results here and say, you know what, these are all within 6 dB of each other, going in this direction that I kind of expected. So everything's okay. I don't need to make any huge drastic, so I can sort of make decisions from there. So I wanted to point that out about your note here about variance. The next thing I would say is what's causing it. If there's so much variance that it looks like a real problem, the next thing to do would be to, first of all, verify that there's not actually a problem with one of the boxes. Like, what if one of them had a really different frequency response than the others? Could that be causing this huge variance you're talking about? What if there's a polarity inversion? Things like that. So you might want to take the array down, measure each box individually, and make sure that they all match. And then the next thing would be to look at your design. Is there a lot of variation because the design is not quite matching the audience plane? You know, our system optimization can only take things so far as the design will allow it, right? So that would be the next thing. So if you want to send me those things, your actual traces and the design that you used in the room, then we can look at that a little bit closer and maybe talk about why you think there was so much variation. You may want to be looking at this in zones. I don't know how big your array is and how big the room is, but imagine a really big array with many elements covering a really long front to back distance ratio. You may want to break that zone apart. You may want to break that array apart into different zones. And instead of EQing the entire thing together first, you may want to use Bob McCarthy's baby bear, mama bear, papa bear approach and look at a zone by itself, optimize that, look at the next zone, optimize that, then look at the whole thing as a whole. So there's another idea for you. I also want to make sure that you're doing your averages correctly. This is a problem solution. I don't know. This is a situation that I didn't understand for a long time, is that in Smart, it takes the offsets into account when it does the average. What I mean by that is that if this trace is way up here, that's going to affect the average. So the first thing you need to do is match your preamp levels on your audio interface for your measurement microphones so that coming in, they all match first. Then you have a more accurate average. Okay, so check on that. If your traces were all super far apart before you did the average, then you might not be getting the kind of average you wanted. Also, you want to have all the traces on top of each other anyway to do the optical average. And I guess that was the next thing I was going to mention. I would avoid doing your average and then hiding all of these and trying to look at just the average. Although it's cleaner and it's easier to see, I think it'll give you better results if you try to do optical averaging, which would be just looking at these all together and trying to find the trends, and then also look at your mathematical average on top of that. Then make some decisions about, what the balance here, is there really a problem? Is there too much variation? Okay, and you can sort of bounce back and forth between two of these and see like what's going on between, my vertical bottom mic here and my vertical top mic here. Okay, let me check on you guys. Are there any other suggestions for Tyler here in the comments? Looks like so far not. Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. Cool. So I talked about these things. So vector versus complex magnitude averaging. What is that? So in SMART, if you head over to the options for your transfer function, option T, you can choose between magnitude averaging type complex and polar. And this could be another thing affecting your measurements. If you are using, well, of course, you're using some amount of averaging in your measurements. And I got to move this over. The averaging I'm talking about is here. Right now it's set to infinite because I was doing something special yesterday. But normally you would have this set to, I can't click on it because I have this selected. Complex polar. But normally you have this set to something like 1 to 3 seconds, right? And then that is what this averaging here is affecting. And I just wanted to point out to you that in this article from Merlin Van Veen, which I'll put into the chat boxes for you guys. In this article, Merlin says, vector or complex averaging is better for correlated signals with a causal relationship, cause and effect, like dual channel applications, like our transfer function. Vector or complex averaging rejects energy arriving outside of the time records and discards it as noise. So just be aware of that. Check it out in SMART. Maybe try switching back and forth between polar and complex. See the results that you're getting. How does that change it? Okay, and then the last thing you asked about was the star method. So I feel like just all of these Q&A sessions are a promotion for Bob McCarthy, but once again, that can be covered in Bob McCarthy's book. So if you just open up Bob McCarthy's book and you search for star, or I think if you also search for Bob McCarthy, star pattern, Roger Gaines, in Google, you will probably find similar information. But here's the star pattern. It's down here on the right. Sorry, I can't make this image bigger. That's a problem in Kindle for Mac. It won't let you zoom in on the images as far as I know. But yeah, you see there's a pattern here of spatial distribution, spatial averaging. So you might take a measurement here, then move a couple of feet forward, a couple of feet back, and a couple of feet to the side. I'll just point out to you that he says that this is all generally in the area of isolation, right? Isolated from other speakers, because down here, employing the star pattern for an array, he says, limited applicability for EQ, okay? But in general, the more measurements, the better, right? If we can, as much as possible, avoid local anomalies and instead search out global trends, in many cases, that's going to help us. So while that's not something that we might be doing for delay setting or level setting, we're not going to average together our vertical bottom and vertical top if we're trying to compare levels between those two places. We might take several different measurements around that one spot in this star pattern, average those together, and then compare the levels. So that's the star pattern, just spatial averaging around a point. One more thing I'll share with you about spatial averaging is that in my interview with Chris Tangiris, he talked about how he prefers doing spatial averaging by height. So instead of moving his microphone to the left and to the right, he changes the height from, say, like sitting head height to standing head height, or he goes lower. And in my interview with Sean Quackenbush, he talked about how he has a mic stand that has a microphone at sitting head height and one at the very bottom. So he can do ground plane and head height and look at those together as an average if he wants to. So Tyler, probably way more information there than you needed. But we covered it all. So comment on this video or send me an email and we can keep talking about this stuff. And if you guys watching the recording of this later have any ideas for Tyler, Ian, or Akil on these subjects, we would love to hear them. My way of doing things, my thoughts on things are definitely not the only way to do anything. I try to share with you guys the things that have worked for me in the field, and And then I like hearing the same thing from you as well. All right, so that concludes this third public Q&A session. There's going to be one more on Friday. If I can remember a couple of questions that people sent in, I think we're going to be talking about Power Alley. We're going to be talking about horizontal aim of line arrays, maybe some stuff about comb filtering. Actually, I have it down here. Friday. There we go. Yeah, so should I aim my arrays into the center of the audience? We're sort of talking about benefits of and problems that can arise from that. All right. Thank you guys for being here live, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody.